How much should Mexico worry? Donald Trump's not yet president, but a few choice tweets from the 45th president to come. And they have the peso plunging. This week, Trump threatened to tax General Motors cars imported from south of the border and cried victory after Ford's decision to forego a new plant in Mexico and instead invest in Michigan. How much of it is really down to the Donald? Is pressure on companies the answer to the outsourcing of jobs? Will it help to redress the disruption and imbalances of globalization? And does it signal the end of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA? Then, of course, there is that other pre-election promise, the building of a wall to keep out migrants from Mexico and places south. Will that happen? What's Mexico's plan when it comes to fence building, a new era of protectionism, and the campaign rhetoric that's stigmatized Mexicans on the campaign trail in the U.S.? Today in the France 24 debate, do Mexicans have their backs against the wall? With us, he was a Trump delegate from California, Attorney James Lacey, the author of Taxifornia. Thanks for being with us from Los Angeles.
It's a pleasure.
From Mexico City, John Ackerman, who teaches at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. From Washington, Juan Carlos Hidalgo of the Cato Institute's Center for Global Liberties and Prosperity. Welcome to the show.
Good evening.
And also from Washington, Pedro da Costa of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate, where you can weigh in on the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. The Mexican peso has eased off record lows against the dollar. That's because the central bank has now intervened. The Mexican currency, which had lost 16% of its value in recent weeks, that intervention has meant the buying of U.S. dollars. It's authored a breather. But again, Michigan's gain with the decision by Ford to switch a new plant north is pain, particularly for the residents of the capital of the north central state of San Luis Potosi. Alexander Hurst has the story.
Residents of San Luis Potosi, Mexico, were hoping that Ford would bring hundreds of new jobs to their town. Now those dreams are dashed.
Of course it affects us a lot, because a lot of people who do not have work were going to have the opportunity, and now they no longer have that opportunity.
Without a doubt, we would have loved the investment to have come to fruition. We understand that the market and the business plans of companies vary according to different circumstances.
The state government plans to pursue Ford for reimbursement of its own investment in the project, but the Mexican government downplayed concerns that other companies might follow suit. Meanwhile, Mexico's former president took to Twitter to express his disappointment, saying Ford's decision hurts Mexico, but also American consumers and Ford shareholders because the company will lose competitiveness. Ford will still move production of the Focus, one of its smaller models, to an existing plant in Hermosillo, Mexico, and plans to hire an additional 200 workers there. But it now plans to invest $700 million to expand production of hybrid and electric vehicles in Michigan. During the presidential campaign, Donald Trump repeatedly called out specific U.S. companies for shifting production abroad, especially to Mexico, and threatened to impose tariffs on imports. He is now claiming credit for Ford's decision. But Ford CEO Mark Fields said in an interview with CNBC that the choice was based on market conditions, specifically a decline in demand for small cars. Sales of the Focus fell by 17% last year, while sales of SUVs rose, a result, analysts say, of low gas prices and low interest rates.
Let me begin with you, Juan Carlos Hidalgo. You saw there in that report a little bit of a tiff between the boss of Ford and Donald Trump. Why did Ford decide to move the plant to Michigan?
Well, I will be surprised if the decision taken by Ford relies exclusively on a single tweet, on a single thread by the President of the United States. Probably there are other reasons that are unknown so far. However, the message that has been sent across the board is that the new president of the United States is going to threat companies to move locations back to the United States, to not send jobs overseas, and that he's willing to incur in the threat of imposing tariffs or other measures in order to force these companies to stay in the United States. So I think that's ominous. I think that that's going to have a long-term impact, not only on the trade relations between Mexico and the United States, but also on U.S. competitiveness. As President Fox said, if U.S. companies try to invest abroad, it's because it's in their interest, in the interest of their shareholders, eventually in the interest of U.S. workers too. So I don't think that this
All right,
is
explain that
be
to us. How is it in the interest of U.S. workers if you invest abroad?
Well, the U.S. companies are not isolated. They compete every day with other companies across the world. Japanese car makers, for example, South Korean car makers. If U.S. companies cannot look for alternative venues, such as Mexico, to produce some parts of cars there, which are cheaper, more competitive, then they're going to be at a disadvantage vis-a-vis other car-making companies around the world. So this eventually is going to hurt the auto industry in the United States, and eventually is going to hurt U.S. workers too.
James Lacey, the Mexican government saying that this is most notably going to strengthen Asian car makers and the Asian car market, this kind of move.
Well, I think that we shouldn't lose sight of what Donald Trump is trying to accomplish through his America First policy. And what really animates this is the decline of the middle class in the United States. The share of the economy that the middle class has participated in America has been on decline for decades. It's really gone down. The United States and some states like California, for example, have become economies of haves and have-nots, where the people in the middle are losing out. And in the middle are where those manufacturing jobs, particularly in the automobile industry, used to help prop up our economy and create great opportunities for aspiration by middle-class families to the upper middle class. So I think that what Trump is doing here is protecting and trying to grow middle-class jobs so that we can reverse this trend, which has really hurt America. And I think that's what the America First policy is. Let me just say, it was Theodore Roosevelt who coined the phrase about the strength of the presidency in itself by saying it was a bully pulpit. Donald Trump's proving that he can do a bully tweet and create jobs in America, and that's a wonderful thing for our middle class.
Pedro da Costa, do you agree?
No, I couldn't disagree more. First of all, I'm an avid user of Twitter, and I have nothing against it, and there are plenty of foreign leaders and global leaders that use Twitter appropriately, but I think there's a general sense, both among political commentators and among foreign nations themselves, even China seems to be worried that the way in which Donald Trump's tweets is erratic and somewhat peevish and childish, and it could potentially lead to trouble down the line, including, as we've seen so far, with tensions rising with China after he tweeted about Taiwan and so on.
All right, but to the point that James Lacey made, that this is something that will prop up the U.S. middle class.
Yeah, so to that point, we have a very different auto industry from the auto industry of yore that he's talking about. And so to the point of why shipping jobs abroad is generally good for U.S. workers, of course it's not good for the plant workers who might have jobs in Michigan and now their jobs would have been in Mexico. It's not good for the individuals, but as your prior guest said, for U.S. firms to remain competitive and continue to create jobs in the long run, they have to be able to make choices. Let's remember, Donald Trump as a businessman often made choices to send his production overseas. And so it's curious for him to suddenly tell firms to not do the same thing. And you have to think about the changes in manufacturing as well. In the past, manufacturing plants were heavy employers of individuals. Now they are so heavily automated that it's virtually, impossible to dream that you're going to have some kind of manufacturing renaissance that's going to recreate the middle class. You have to look at new sectors like services and raise wages in those sectors in order to improve the standard of living in the United States. And lastly, I think the important issue to keep in mind is that there's a difference between protecting specific jobs and protecting workers. One of the reasons that people feel the pain so sharply in the United States versus in Europe when they lose their job is because we don't have a social safety net in this country. And so people lose their health benefits and they lose all their social attachments. And so the lack of a safety net makes the experience of job loss feel more painful to the individual.
All right, lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. Pete saying Trump dragging back manufacturing could create an impoverished state in Mexico and a migrant crisis too big to handle. John Ackerman, how big a problem is this for Mexico?
Hey, Francois, good to be on with you again. From a Mexican perspective, I think there's two sides to this story. On one side, we have a real danger, of course, with Trump following through with his threats against Mexico and Mexicans. This is part of a larger package, anti-Mexican package, which includes the threat to build a wall. Of course, there already is a barrier built originally by Clinton on about a third of the wall of the border, but he wants to extend it all the way along. He wants to expel at least 2 million Mexicans in the first months of his presidency. He has talked about repealing NAFTA. We call here in Mexico the Tratado de Libre Comercio. And this announcement, this pressure put on Ford to withdraw investment in Mexico is definitely a bad sign for Mexican economy. Nevertheless, I think there is a silver lining to this cloud, Francois, because NAFTA and so-called free market integration of North America has turned Mexico over the last 20 years into, a small appendage of the United States economy and has led Mexico to basically abandon its national economy. And this is an opportunity for Mexico to look back towards itself, look towards Latin America. Lots of very large, important economies, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, all throughout Latin America that together with Mexico could, I think, create a much more strong common market and could respond to this withdrawal of the United States with a strength in Latin America. There's also a possibility here for alliances between Mexicans in the United States and in Mexico. There are about 35 million people of Mexican heritage in the United States. You add that to 115 million Mexicans in Mexico itself. You have an enormous group of people, 150 million people in North America, which through political and economic action can try to do more of a grassroots North American integration. So I think there are opportunities for the future as well.
Opportunities to the future as well. You're saying that too much reliance on bilateral trade. Nonetheless, the U.S. and Mexico aren't going to unwind their relationship in a minute. Now, remember back in August when Mexico's finance minister resigned after playing middleman for candidate Trump's visit, which hours later was followed, you'll recall, by a speech in Arizona where he insisted he would still build the wall. Well, Luis Videgaray is back. He's just been appointed as foreign minister, squarely with an eye to handling the 45th president of the United States.
Before the change of government in the United States on January the 20th, the instruction to Minister Videgaray is to accelerate the dialogue and contacts so that from the first day of the new administration, we can establish the basis of a constructive working relationship.
John Ackerman, is that the right way to go? Get somebody who can whisper in Trump's ear, or at least can he respects at the table?
I love the use of the word constructive relationship. This is not the first time Peña Nieto has referred to it. The idea here in Mexico is what's going to happen is that we're going to have Videgaray, the new foreign canciller, and Peña Nieto, building that wall with Trump. That's a constructive relationship. This is really ridiculous. I mean, Videgaray was kicked out of the job as Treasury Secretary precisely because of his incredible mistake of bringing Trump while he was on the campaign trail, organizing, a campaign event in the national office of the presidency in Los Pinos, the equivalent of the Élysée in France. A campaign act by the Mexican president supporting Trump. This was so incredibly rejected by the Mexican people that Videgaray was kicked out. He is Trump's friend, sure, but he's no friend of the Mexican people. So what we have here is Trump even deciding the foreign minister of Mexico and the Mexican president, Peña Nieto, going along with this. And this is not playing over well in Mexico, as you can imagine.
Juan Carlos Hidalgo, your thoughts?
Well, Peña Nieto and his new foreign minister are in an extremely difficult position. As Mr. Ackerman just said, Mexico was at the receiving end during the campaign of a barrage of insults and threats. And it seems like it was a top priority during the campaign to target Mexico. I don't see President Trump climbing down from his promises. I mean, Mexico was an integral part of his populist message, and I don't see him withdrawing from those threats. He's gonna certainly move on into doing something. Whether we don't know yet exactly. We don't know whether this is gonna be renegotiating NAFTA. We don't know yet if this is gonna be building a wall, although he now talks about a fence. We don't know yet if this is gonna be about deporting millions of immigrants who are undocumented in the United States. Mostly of them are Mexican. So that explains a lot of the uncertainty. And Peña Nieto, it was a huge mistake what he did last year when he invited candidate Trump to Mexico. He provided a platform for the candidate that was doing badly in the polls back then. But now he's the president, and Mexico has to work with him. So we'll see how this plays out. The problem is that you have in front of you a person who is extremely unpredictable. He's a bully, and it's not going to be easy for the Mexican government to deal with him.
Pedro da Costa?
So I wanted to bring into perspective a little bit the impact of trade on the overall economy. And I urge your guests and your graphics team to just put together a chart of U.S. manufacturing employment over time. And you can see very clearly that when NAFTA gets signed, U.S. manufacturing employment, nothing happens to it. It just continues at the same level. Now, when China enters the WTO in 2001, that's a different story. There can be an argument about how many jobs were lost at that point. Mexico was barely a blip. In fact, what Mexico did, it has allowed U.S. auto manufacturers, which were bumbling, as you recall, and losing very badly to their competitors in the 80s, to become more competitive, to remain above water, and to create jobs. And so that's the overall dynamic that you have to keep in mind. And just to one little bit of perspective, the worst estimate for job losses from NAFTA, the most severe that unions have put together, is that 900,000 jobs were lost because of NAFTA. Keep in mind the financial crisis cost 9 million jobs, and we're still recovering from that. So it's a very small impact on employment that trade agreements actually have.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points and look at the context beyond the bilateral relationship. When we come back, we'll leave you with this one reaction, plenty of them on the hashtag F24Debate from Kristen on Facebook. Hasn't Ford already stated that it had made the decision before Trump said anything? Please don't give Trump credit for things he didn't do. We'll pick up on that when we come back. You're watching the France 24 Debate.